Betrayal isn't a thunderclap. It doesn't arrive all at once with its full force. No, it sneaks in through the smallest of cracks, spreading silently, until one day you look up and realize your entire foundation is crumbling. My name's Jack. I'm 26, married to Olivia, my college sweetheart. She's a nurse. Empathetic, compassionate, the kind of person who always seems to have endless reserves of kindness to give. We have a daughter, Aria, who just turned 4, though she spends most of her time in a hospital room these days. Leukemia. That word alone feels heavy enough to crush a soul. She was diagnosed 6 months ago, and every day since has been a battle. For Aria, for Olivia, and for me. Chemo treatments, endless appointments, sleepless nights. I've tried to stay strong for my family, but it's the kind of weight that reshapes you. Still, Olivia and I were in this together, or so I thought. When I looked at her, I saw my partner in this war, someone who was just as desperate as I was to give Aria a fighting chance. Sure, things between us have been strained. How could they not be? But I chalked it up to the stress of our circumstances. I never once considered there might be something deeper. Until Tuesday. It started as a normal day, if you could even call anything in our life normal anymore. Olivia had taken Aria to another doctor's appointment while I stayed home to catch up on work. I'd offered to go, but Olivia said it would be a quick checkup. She texted me updates throughout the day. Aria is brave as always, got her sticker from the nurse. That sort of thing. When they came back, Olivia was quiet, preoccupied. I asked how it went, and she shrugged, saying something vague about the doctor wanted to run more tests. I didn't push. It was clear she didn't want to talk, and honestly, I wasn't sure I had the energy to deal with more bad news. That night, as Olivia put Aria to bed, I tried to focus on work. I poured myself into blueprints and budgets, anything to distract myself from the nagging sense of unease I couldn't quite place. But when Olivia finally came to bed, her silence stretched between us like a chasm. She turned away from me without a word, scrolling through her phone, her face lit up by the screen. I told myself it was just exhaustion, that we'd talk in the morning. But as I lay there in the dark, listening to her steady breathing, something gnawed at me. A whisper of doubt. A crack. That's when it all began. The unease didn't let go. It followed me into the next day like a shadow, clinging to every moment. Olivia acted normal, at least on the surface. She got Aria ready for her afternoon play session at the hospital, prepared her favorite peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and even managed to smile when Aria cracked a joke. But something about her felt off, distant, like she was going through the motions while her mind was somewhere else. That whisper of doubt from the night before grew louder. I wanted to shake it off, to blame it on stress or exhaustion. But the smallest things started to stand out. The way she kept checking her phone, glancing at it every few minutes as though she were waiting for something. The way she smiled at the screen, not the tired smile I'd grown used to, but something softer, almost private. I tried to ignore it. God knows I wanted to, but the crack in my foundation widened. I couldn't help myself. I started noticing everything. Her quiet moments, her excuses for stepping out of the room when her phone rang, the little white lies she told about why she was running late or why she had to stay at the hospital longer than expected. It wasn't until Thursday evening that the whisper turned into a shout. Aria had just fallen asleep after a long day of treatments. Olivia was in the shower, and her phone buzzed on the nightstand. I didn't mean to look, I swear I didn't. But my eyes flicked to the screen, and I froze. The notification was from Dr. Harper. Liam, Aria's oncologist. The message preview read, "You were amazing today. Can't stop thinking about you." For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't think. I just stared at the screen, my stomach twisting into knots. My first thought was that it had to be a mistake, a miscommunication. There was no way Olivia would. The phone buzzed again, another message from Liam. "Let me know when we can talk again. Miss you already." My heart pounded in my chest as I processed the words. Miss you already. Those 4 words shattered something inside me. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Something was happening. Something I wasn't ready to face. I put the phone back where I found it, careful not to make a sound, and walked out of the room. My mind was spinning, my body numb. Had I been blind? How long had this been going on? Was it emotional? Physical? My thoughts spiraled into dark places, each one worse than the last. When Olivia came out of the shower, smiling faintly as though nothing was wrong, I felt like I was looking at a stranger. I couldn't say anything. Not yet. I needed time to think, to figure out what the hell I was going to do. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those messages. Heard those words in my head. Miss you already. The crack in my foundation had become a fissure, and I knew it was only going to get worse. You ever have one of those moments where someone's reaction tells you everything you need to know? Like, they don't even have to say much, their body language, the way their voice shifts, the way they refuse to look you in the eye. That was Olivia this morning. I woke up with one goal: to take Aria to her doctor's appointment. After those messages from Dr. Harper, there was no way I was letting her keep this part of our lives to herself anymore. I needed to see what was going on, to put myself in the middle of it. Call it paranoia, call it my gut, whatever it was, I couldn't ignore it. So, over breakfast, I told her I'd take Aria to the appointment today. And man, if looks could kill. She froze right there, holding one of those little juice boxes Aria loves. She didn't even turn around at first, just stood there like someone had just told her the sky was falling. Then, when she finally moved, it was like she was running on autopilot, zipping Aria's bag with way too much force, like the zipper had personally offended her. Her reaction was instant, defensive. She started throwing excuses at me, rapid fire, like I wasn't capable of taking my own daughter to a doctor's appointment. You don't know the routine. You're not used to how things work. All I could think was, what the hell? It's a doctor's office, not a rocket launch. But it wasn't what she said that got to me. It was how she said it. There was this edge in her voice, like she was afraid. No, not afraid. Uneasy. Almost panicked. That's when I realized this wasn't just her being overprotective or stressed about Aria's condition. This was something else entirely. She kept pushing, trying to convince me to let her handle it. Like always. But I wasn't backing down. Not this time. And the more I pushed back, the more aggressive she got. I've seen her angry before. Any couple has their moments, but this was different. It wasn't just anger. It was desperation. That's when it hit me. She didn't want me there. Not because she thought I couldn't handle it, but because me being there would expose something. I didn't know what yet, but her reaction said it all. Then Aria spoke up. Poor kid. She was just sitting there with her cereal, watching her parents spiral into this tense, silent standoff. Her little voice broke through, asking why we were yelling, even though we weren't exactly yelling. Olivia immediately switched gears, plastering on that mom smile she's so good at. She calmed Aria down like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just been seconds away from a full-blown meltdown. It was almost impressive how quickly she could turn it off. But I wasn't fooled. I saw the way her hands trembled as she packed the rest of Aria's things. I saw the way she avoided looking at me when she finally grabbed her coat and walked out the door. She didn't even try to argue anymore. She just left. And as I stood there in the quiet kitchen, watching her car pull out of the driveway, I felt a mix of anger, sadness. No, not sadness. Determination. She was hiding something. That much was clear. And if she thought she could keep me in the dark forever, she was wrong. This wasn't about trust anymore. This was about finding the truth. Children have a way of exposing truths without even realizing it. They don't filter their thoughts or consider the consequences of their words. They just say what's on their minds. That's what makes their honesty both refreshing and, in moments like this, utterly devastating. The day after I took Aria to her hospital play session, things felt different. She wasn't her usual bubbly self on the drive home. Instead of her typical chatter about crafts or story time, she sat quietly in the back seat, staring out the window. It wasn't like her, and it put me on edge. I decided to let her come to me when she was ready. Pushing wouldn't help, and I'd learned over the months that patience was key when it came to Aria. Later that afternoon, she wandered into the kitchen while I was cleaning up. She held her stuffed animal close, her posture hesitant but deliberate, as though she was working up the courage to say something important. When she finally spoke, her words hit me like a freight train. She wanted to see Dr. Harper the next time she went to the hospital. Not just for her own appointment, but with her mom. She mentioned how much she liked being there when Olivia was with her, how the visits seemed to make her mom happy. It was the kind of statement only a child could make. Simple, innocent, and completely gut-wrenching. It confirmed what I had already started to suspect, but hadn't wanted to face. It wasn't just that Olivia was close to Dr. Harper. It was that their connection was strong enough for Arya, at just 4 years old, to notice and comment on it. As I stood there, gripping the edge of the counter to steady myself, the weight of her words pressed down on me. Arya didn't understand what she was saying or why it mattered, but I did. The image of Olivia and Dr. Harper, laughing, talking, sharing moments I wasn't a part of, lodged itself firmly in my mind. It wasn't just a theory anymore. It was a reality. That night, Olivia came home like nothing had happened. She moved around the house with her usual ease, humming softly as she unpacked groceries and sorted through mail. She didn't seem to notice the way I watched her, every movement and gesture feeling both familiar and foreign at the same time. I didn't bring it up. Not yet. The thought of confronting her while Arya was nearby, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around her, felt wrong. But as I sat in the quiet of our home, the tension growing heavier with every passing moment, I couldn't ignore the shift anymore. Arya had seen it. I had felt it. Whatever was happening between Olivia and Dr. Harper wasn't just in my head. It was real, and it was becoming impossible to ignore. The cracks in our foundation were widening, and I could feel the entire structure of our family teetering on the edge. The tension between Olivia and me hadn't gone away. If anything, it had grown heavier, a silent weight pressing down on every conversation, every interaction. I tried to push through it for Arya's sake, but even she seemed to sense the unease lingering between us. And then Olivia dropped the bombshell. It was a Saturday evening, one of the rare, quiet moments in our house. I was in the living room, reviewing some work documents, while Olivia was busy organizing Arya's medications in the kitchen. Her movements were deliberate, her focus intense. She had been unusually quiet all day, which wasn't exactly new, but there was something different about her silence this time. Something calculated. When she came into the room, I could tell right away that she had something on her mind. She stood there for a moment, as if choosing her words carefully, before announcing that she had taken on a new position as a nurse under Dr. Harper. She delivered it plainly, almost as if it were an afterthought, like it didn't require further explanation. The words hit me like a slap. I couldn't react at first, my brain working overtime to process what she had just said. Dr. Harper? The man I had already begun to suspect was too close to my wife? Now, she was going to work directly with him? Olivia's tone was casual, but there was an undercurrent of defensiveness in her voice. She framed it as a natural step, emphasizing that it would allow her to spend more time at the hospital, closer to Arya during her treatments. On the surface, it sounded reasonable, logical even, but something about the way she avoided looking at me made the whole thing feel wrong. It wasn't just a career move. It was something else, something deeper. She continued speaking, explaining the hours and how it would help ease the financial burden we'd been under since Arya's diagnosis. Her reasoning was solid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was rehearsed, like she had anticipated pushback and was ready to deflect it. As she talked, I couldn't help but think back to those text messages from Dr. Harper. "Miss you already." The way Arya had mentioned how much her mom laughed and smiled when they were around him. Now this? It felt like a calculated move, a way for her to justify spending even more time with him without raising suspicion. Except it was doing the exact opposite. I nodded, keeping my face neutral, but inside I was seething. My mind raced with questions I wasn't ready to ask. Was this decision really about Arya? Or was it about something else entirely? And if it was about something else, how far had it already gone? Olivia didn't seem to notice my silence. Or if she did, she didn't acknowledge it. She finished her explanation, gave me a tight smile, and walked back into the kitchen. Just like that, the conversation was over, leaving me sitting there with my thoughts spiraling out of control. I stayed up late that night, long after Olivia had gone to bed. The living room was quiet, but my mind wasn't. Her decision to work under Dr. Harper wasn't just another crack in our foundation. It was a full-blown fault line, threatening to shatter everything we'd built. I knew I couldn't keep avoiding this. The time for quiet observation was over. Something was happening, and if I didn't confront it soon, I was afraid of how much worse it could get. After Olivia started her new position under Dr. Harper, everything about her began to shift. and not in ways that made sense for a stressed-out mom balancing work and a sick child. At first, I chalked it up to the pressure of the job, but it quickly became clear that this was something else entirely. Every morning before she left for work, Olivia started putting in more effort. Way more effort. Her usual routine of scrubs and a messy ponytail was replaced by carefully applied makeup, sleek hairstyles, and brand new clothes that hugged her figure in ways I hadn't seen her dress since before Aria's diagnosis. She even started wearing perfume again, something she hadn't done in years. The faint floral scent lingered in the hallway long after she left the house, a quiet reminder of just how much she had changed. At first, I tried to convince myself it was a confidence thing. Maybe the new job gave her a sense of purpose. Maybe dressing up was her way of taking control in a life that felt like it was spinning out of control. But as the days turned into weeks, her transformation felt less like self-care and more like someone trying to impress. Someone trying to be noticed. What hurt the most wasn't the way she started to carry herself, or the fact that she was suddenly glowing every morning before work. It was what she left behind. The closer she got to her new role, the farther she drifted from us. Aria started noticing first. She'd ask why Mommy wasn't around to read bedtime stories anymore, or why she was late coming home after chemo treatments. "Is Mommy mad at me?" she asked once, her small voice so quiet I almost didn't hear it. I told her no, of course not, but the question stuck with me like a thorn. Olivia started staying late at the hospital, always with an excuse at the ready. Paperwork took longer than expected, or one of the patients had a rough day. But the patterns became impossible to ignore. Her late nights always seemed to coincide with Dr. Harper's schedule. It didn't matter if Aria had a rough day of her own, or if I was barely holding it together trying to juggle work and her care. Olivia was suddenly too busy to notice. It was little things at first, like forgetting to pack Aria's favorite snacks for her hospital visits, or brushing off her questions about when Mommy would come home. But as the days passed, it got worse. She started skipping meals with us entirely, opting to eat at the hospital or not at all. When she was home, she was distant, scrolling on her phone or heading to bed early without so much as a glance in my direction. The cracks between us had turned into gaping holes. She didn't even bother pretending anymore. One night, when I asked if she'd be home early the next day, because Aria had a big appointment, she barely looked up from her phone. "I'll try," she said, but I knew she wouldn't. What was most damning wasn't just her absence. It was the way she seemed happier without us. I'd catch glimpses of her smiling at her phone, her eyes lighting up in a way I hadn't seen in months, maybe even years. She didn't smile like that when she was with Aria. She didn't smile like that with me. Whoever or whatever she was texting was giving her something I clearly couldn't. I tried to reason with myself, to find an explanation that didn't lead to the conclusion I was dreading. Maybe she was throwing herself into work to cope with the stress. Maybe she needed the distraction. But late at night, when the house was quiet and Aria was asleep, I couldn't lie to myself anymore. This wasn't about work. This wasn't about stress. Olivia was slipping away from us, and I was starting to think she had already made her choice. I couldn't take it anymore. The late nights, the indifference, the way Olivia seemed to drift further and further away from Aria and me. It was all too much. I needed answers, and I needed them now. Sitting around and waiting for the pieces to fall into place wasn't cutting it anymore. So, I made a decision. I was going to show up at the hospital unannounced. If there was nothing to hide, she wouldn't have a problem with it. But deep down, I already knew what I was going to find. It was late afternoon when I left work early, telling my boss I had a family emergency. The drive to the hospital felt like an eternity. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, my stomach churning with a mix of dread and adrenaline. I kept telling myself there could be an innocent explanation for everything, but the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. When I arrived, the parking lot was nearly full. The hospital bustled with the usual activity, nurses rushing between shifts, patients shuffling in and out with loved ones. I walked through the lobby, past the reception desk, trying to appear calm and purposeful. Nobody stopped me. I knew Olivia's schedule, and I knew exactly where to find her. The oncology wing was quieter, the air heavy with the weight of what happened there every day. As I rounded the corner toward Dr. Harper's office, I saw her. Olivia. She was standing just outside his door, her back partially turned toward me. She was smiling, that same radiant smile I hadn't seen directed at me in months. And then, before I could process what was happening, it happened. Dr. Harper leaned in, and Olivia didn't pull away. Their lips met, and for a moment, everything else disappeared. My heart stopped. The hallway, the buzzing fluorescent lights, the faint beeping of monitors in the distance. It all blurred into nothing. All I could see was them. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. They didn't see me. They were too wrapped up in each other, too comfortable, too familiar. My stomach churned, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. It wasn't just the kiss. It was what the kiss represented. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a fleeting moment. It was something deeper, something I had feared but hadn't wanted to believe. For a split second, I thought about storming over there, about tearing into both of them right then and there. But the hospital wasn't the place for this. Area's treatments happen here. Dozens of families were dealing with their own pain, their own battles. I couldn't turn this into a public spectacle. Not here. Not now. So I turned and walked away, my footsteps silent, but my heart pounding so loudly I was sure they'd hear it. I didn't stop until I was outside, the cool air hitting my face like a slap. I leaned against the car, my hands trembling as I tried to process what I'd just seen. But there was no time to sit and wallow. I needed to act. Olivia had already made her choice, and now I had to make mine. I drove straight home, every mile stretching like an eternity. When I walked through the door, Aria was sitting on the couch, her favorite stuffed animal tucked under her arm. She looked up at me with those big, innocent eyes, completely unaware of the storm brewing around her. My heart ached. She didn't deserve this. None of this was her fault. Without saying much, the drive back from my parents' house was quiet, but my mind was anything but. I couldn't stop replaying the moment I had witnessed at the hospital, the way Olivia and Dr. Harper had kissed so effortlessly, as if it was something they had done 100 times before. That image burned in my mind, each detail sharper than the last. The thought of her betrayal wasn't just a crack in our already strained marriage. It was the shattering blow that broke it apart entirely. When I got home, the house felt empty. It wasn't just the physical absence of Aria. It was the absence of everything that once made this place a home. Her toys were no longer scattered across the living room. The laughter and light she brought were missing, replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed down on me like a weight. I sat there in the stillness, waiting for Olivia to come home, knowing that the confrontation ahead would change everything. When Olivia finally walked through the door, she was still dressed for work, her hair neatly styled, her makeup flawless. She looked every bit the composed, professional nurse she always claimed to be. But as her eyes swept across the room and landed on the empty couch, her expression shifted. Confusion turned into concern, her gaze darting around the house, searching for something or someone. She dropped her bag onto the counter with a thud, her movements sharp and hurried as she scanned the space. The unease in her body language became unmistakable as she realized something was off. The absence of Aria was glaring, and her posture stiffened as if bracing for impact. Her focus shifted to me. She stepped forward, her expression demanding an explanation, her body radiating tension. The silence between us was heavy, almost suffocating, as she waited for me to speak. I didn't rush to fill the void. Instead, I let the moment stretch, forcing her to confront the reality of the situation. Her frustration was palpable as she waited for an answer that I wasn't ready to give. Not yet. Finally, I broke the silence. I told her where Aria was, my voice calm and deliberate. I explained that she was with my parents, that I had taken her there earlier in the day. As I spoke, I watched the realization dawn on Olivia's face, her initial confusion giving way to shock and anger. She froze for a moment, processing my words, before her movements became frantic. Her gestures were sharp, her body language demanding answers, but I stood my ground. I didn't give her the reassurance she was looking for, didn't explain myself in the way she clearly wanted. Instead, I let the weight of her choices settle over her. As I spoke further, laying out the reasons for my actions, Olivia's expression shifted again. Her composure cracked, and I could see the panic rising in her. She tried to assert herself, her emotions spilling over, but it was clear she understood what I was telling her. The control she thought she had was slipping through her fingers, and she couldn't stop it. Her face flushed as I revealed what I had seen, as I made it clear that I knew about her affair with Dr. Harper. She tried to mask her reaction, to feign disbelief, but her body betrayed her. The slight widening of her eyes, the way her breath hitched, it was enough. She knew she couldn't deny it. I kept my voice steady, every word deliberate, every sentence cutting through her defenses. I laid everything bare, her distance, her betrayal, her negligence as a mother. With each word, the reality of what she had done seemed to weigh heavier on her. Her anger dissolved into tears, her shoulders shaking as the gravity of the moment hit her. She looked at me, searching for some sign of forgiveness, some indication that this could be fixed. But there was nothing left to save. Her actions had made sure of that. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her standing there, alone in the house that was no longer a home. The sound of her muffled sobs followed me as I climbed the stairs, but I didn't look back. Aria was safe, surrounded by love and stability, far from the chaos that Olivia had brought into our lives. For now, that was all that mattered. But the storm brewing between Olivia and me was far from over. It was just beginning. You know how people say revenge doesn't make you feel better? They're lying. Or at least, they've never had someone tear apart their family while smiling to their face. I'm not proud of what I did next, but I won't pretend it didn't feel good. When someone shatters your trust, destroys your home, and neglects the one person who matters most, you stop playing by the rules. After the confrontation, I gave myself a day to think. I needed to act strategically, not impulsively. Olivia had already damaged our marriage beyond repair, but her actions went beyond just hurting me. She had neglected Aria when she needed her the most, and that was something I couldn't forgive. I knew if I didn't take control of the situation, she'd try to manipulate the narrative, playing the role of the misunderstood wife and mother. So, I decided to burn it all down, her job, her reputation, everything she thought she could protect. The first step was her job. Working under Dr. Harper was the perfect setup for their little affair, and I wasn't going to let them continue playing house at the expense of my daughter's well-being. I compiled the evidence I had, text messages, photos, even the timestamp proof of their kiss at the hospital. I reached out to the hospital's administration, framing my message as concern for the professional integrity of the oncology department. I wasn't vindictive in my tone. I simply laid out the facts and let the evidence speak for itself. Hospitals don't take kindly to scandals, especially when they involve staff in positions of trust. Within a week, both Olivia and Dr. Harper were under investigation. Word spread quickly among their colleagues, and their pristine reputations began to crumble. I heard through mutual contacts that Olivia had been put on unpaid leave pending the outcome of the investigation. As for Dr. Harper, he was quietly removed from his position. The perfect facade they'd built together was cracking, and I had no regrets about being the one holding the hammer. But I didn't stop there. Olivia had spent months neglecting her role as a mother, and I was determined to ensure she wouldn't have the opportunity to do it again. I filed for sole custody of Aria, using her behavior as evidence of her unfitness as a parent. Her absences, her late nights, her failure to prioritize Aria's care. All of it painted a clear picture of someone who had chosen her own desires over her daughter's needs. My lawyer was ruthless, and by the time we walked into court, Olivia had no ground to stand on. The judge awarded me full custody, with Olivia granted only supervised visitation. I watched her face crumble as the decision was handed down, but I felt no pity. She had made her choices. This was the consequence. With the legal battle over, I turned my focus to rebuilding what was left of my life. I sold the house. It held too many memories, most of them tainted by betrayal, and moved into a smaller, quieter place closer to my parents. Aria adjusted surprisingly well, and having her grandparents and great-grandparents close by brought her a joy that had been missing for months. As for me, I started therapy, not just to process the betrayal, but to figure out how to move forward as a single dad to a little girl who needed me more than ever. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. I learned to let go of the anger, to focus on building a life where Arya could feel safe and loved. Looking back now, I realize this experience taught me more about myself than I ever wanted to know. It showed me how far I was willing to go to protect the people I love, but it also forced me to confront my own flaws. The ways I'd been blind to the cracks forming in my marriage, the ways I'd ignored my instincts until it was too late. If I could give advice to anyone in a similar situation, it would be this: trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is. Don't let fear of confrontation keep you from finding the truth. And when you do find it, act with purpose. Revenge might not heal everything, but taking control of your life and protecting what matters most, that's what truly sets you free. These days, Arya is doing better. Her treatments are tough, but she's tougher. She's my reason for getting up every morning, my proof that even in the darkest times, there's still something worth fighting for. And Olivia? I don't think about her much anymore. She's a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when you forget the promises you made to the people who trust you most. To anyone reading this, don't let someone else's selfishness define your story. Take control, protect what matters, and never, ever settle for less than you deserve.